There's a conversation that happens about you when you're not in the room. You've never heard it. You probably wouldn't believe it if you did. The people you assume barely notice you, the ones you think tolerate you at best, they talk about you when you leave, and what they say would stagger you because it sounds nothing like the story you've been telling yourself about how the world sees you. Jung was fascinated by a particular kind of person, someone who walked in carrying an almost unbearable conviction that they were too much, too intense, too strange, too difficult to love, while simultaneously being one of the most deeply loved people in their entire social world. The gap between how they believed they were perceived and how they were actually perceived was so vast it bordered on delusional. Except the delusion ran in the opposite direction from what you'd expect. These people weren't grandiose, they were the opposite. They had a pathological inability to register how much they meant to the people around them. And that inability was costing them everything. Today I'm going to show you what Jung discovered about why certain people are loved far more than they ever realize, the specific psychological mechanisms that make this invisible to the person receiving the love, and what happens when you finally begin to close the gap between how loved you think you are and how loved you actually are. Because if you've spent your life feeling like you're on the outside looking in, like you're somehow harder to love than everyone else, Jung would tell you that you've been operating with faulty equipment. Your love detection system is broken. And the evidence of how much people care about you has been accumulating all around you while you've been blind to it. Jung noticed something strange when he began mapping the social lives of his most psychologically aware patients, the ones who carried the deepest wounds around belonging, the ones who felt fundamentally unlovable at their core, were consistently surrounded by people who cared about them with a ferocity they couldn't register. Friends who'd rearrange their schedules to show up when called. Partners who stayed through impossible stretches. Colleagues who spoke about them with a respect that bordered on reverence. The love was there. It was obvious to everyone except the person receiving it. And Jung wanted to understand why. What was the mechanism that allowed someone to be genuinely, deeply loved and simultaneously convinced they weren't? Because this wasn't simple low self-esteem. This was something more structural, more embedded in the architecture of how certain people's psyches processed relational information. Their consciousness had a filter that systematically screened out evidence of being valued, like a mail system that delivered every rejection letter instantly, but routed every love letter to a folder they never checked. He traced it back, as he traced most things, to the earliest years. The child who was loved conditionally learned something devastating about the nature of love itself. They learn that love is a transaction, that it must be earned through performance, that it can be revoked at any moment, that the truest version of themselves is the version least likely to be loved. This child grows into an adult with a specific kind of psychological architecture. They become hypervigilant to signs of rejection and nearly blind to signs of acceptance. Think about what that means in practical terms. You're at a gathering, and 20 people are warm to you, genuinely happy you showed up. One person is cold, maybe distracted, maybe having a bad day, maybe just not particularly expressive. Your nervous system locks onto the cold one. That single data point overwrites the other 20. You leave the gathering convinced that something was off, that you don't quite belong, that people were just being polite. Meanwhile, 3 of those 20 warm people go home and mention to their partners how good it was to see you. You'll never know that happened. Jung would have called this a perceptual distortion rooted in the shadow. The shadow, in this case, contains the unbearable possibility that you might actually be lovable as you are. That sounds backwards. You'd think the shadow would contain the fear of being unlovable. For someone who built their entire psychological survival system around the premise that love must be earned, the idea that they might be loved freely, without performance, without earning it, that's the most destabilizing thing imaginable. Because if love was available all along without the performance, then all that suffering was unnecessary. And that realization is so painful that the psyche would rather maintain the illusion of being unloved than face it. So you keep the evidence out. You reinterpret warmth as politeness. You dismiss compliments as social lubrication. You explain away loyalty as habit. You tell yourself that if people really knew you, the real you, the messy and complicated and too much you, they'd leave. And this narrative feels so true, so bone-deep familiar, that you never question whether it's actually accurate. You just assume it's reality. But here's what Jung observed about the people who carry this wound. They tend to possess qualities that are genuinely magnetic to others, and those qualities are often the direct result of the wound itself. The child who had to learn to read emotional atmospheres to survive became an adult who makes people feel deeply seen. The person who never felt safe enough to be careless with others' feelings became someone who handles people with extraordinary care. The one who knows what it's like to feel invisible became the one who never lets anyone else feel that way. These aren't small things. In a world where most people walk around feeling unseen and unheard, the person who actually pays attention, who remembers the small details, who asks the question nobody else thinks to ask, who notices when someone's energy shifts, that person becomes irreplaceable in people's lives. And they usually have no idea they're doing it, because to them, it's just how they operate. They can't imagine functioning any other way. People with deep empathic sensitivity often undervalued their impact precisely because their abilities felt effortless to them. What required enormous emotional labor from others, genuine attunement, careful listening, intuitive understanding, came naturally to them. So they assumed it had no value. They'd sit with a friend through a crisis, offer exactly the right words at exactly the right moment, help someone feel held and understood in a way they'd never experienced, and then go home thinking they hadn't done anything special. Meanwhile, that friend carries the memory of that conversation for years, brings it up to other people. You know who really helped me through that? The one who just sat with me and actually listened. You never hear those conversations. They happen in your absence, in the spaces you don't occupy. There's another layer to this that Jung found particularly fascinating. People who've done significant inner work, who've confronted their shadow, who've sat with their pain instead of running from it, who've developed genuine self-awareness, carry a quality that others can sense but rarely name. Jung connected it to the process of individuation. As someone becomes more psychologically whole, more integrated, less fragmented between persona and shadow, they develop what he described as a kind of gravitational presence. People are drawn to them without fully understanding why. You've probably experienced this from the other side. You've met someone and felt immediately at ease with them, like you could say anything, like the usual social armor wasn't necessary. And you couldn't explain why. They didn't do anything dramatic. They were just present in a way that felt different from how most people are present. That quality, that particular kind of being there, comes from integration. It comes from someone who's stopped pretending to be one thing while hiding another. And it's so rare that when people encounter it, they respond to it almost instinctively. The problem is that the person radiating this quality is usually the last one to recognize it. They're too busy cataloging their flaws, replaying conversations they think they fumbled, worrying about whether they said the wrong thing. Their inner world is a constant tribunal where they're always the defendant. And so the warmth flowing toward them bounces off like rain hitting glass. It's there, they just can't absorb it. Jung identified something else that makes this dynamic even more painful. Many deeply loved people have trained themselves to preemptively withdraw before they can be rejected. They pull back first. They create distance. They convince themselves they're being considerate by not burdening people with their presence. But what they're actually doing is depriving others of the very thing those others value most about them. And then the distance they create becomes, in their minds, evidence that nobody really wanted them around anyway. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of loneliness, enacted by someone surrounded by people who would close that distance in a heartbeat if they were given the chance. Consider the person who doesn't reach out because they assume they'd be bothering people, who doesn't share good news because they don't want to seem like they're seeking attention, who sits alone on difficult nights rather than calling someone because they're convinced they'd be a burden. These behaviors look like independence from the outside. From the inside, they feel like the natural consequence of being someone people don't genuinely want around. But from the perspective of the people who care about them, it's bewildering. It's watching someone you love slowly disappear and being unable to reach them because they keep insisting you don't really mean it when you say you care. Jung saw this as one of the cruelest tricks the wounded psyche plays on itself. The very qualities that make you deeply lovable, your sensitivity, your depth, your refusal to be superficial, your capacity to truly see people, are the qualities that your wound tells you make you too much. Your depth gets reframed as intensity. Your sensitivity gets labeled as weakness. Your ability to see beneath surfaces becomes overthinking, and you spend your life apologizing for the exact things that make people love you. And here's where it gets even more layered. People don't just love you despite what you consider your flaws. They often love you specifically because of the qualities you've been trying to hide or minimize. The friend who loves your passionate rants about things you care about, the same rants you cut short because you're worried about being too intense. The partner who fell in love with your emotional depth, the same depth you keep trying to flatten because someone once told you it was exhausting. The colleague who trusts you precisely because you're willing to say the uncomfortable true thing. The same honesty you keep second-guessing because it's made you unpopular before. If you've been carrying this wound, if you've spent years convinced that the real you is somehow harder to love than the performed version, what Jung discovered might feel almost impossible to take in. And that difficulty absorbing it is itself part of the pattern. The information that you're loved doesn't compute because your operating system was built to process a different kind of data. This guide we've put together, True Self-Discovery, was designed for exactly this kind of moment, when the gap between who you believe you are and who you actually are starts becoming visible, and you need a way to sit with that honestly. 24 reflection exercises, all rooted in Jung's approach, all aimed at helping you see yourself with the same clarity and compassion you so naturally extend to everyone else. You'll find the link below. But let's keep going because there's more to this than just understanding the wound. Jung found that the secrecy of other people's love for you has its own explanation, and it's one most people never consider. Love is frequently silent because expressing it feels vulnerable. The friend who thinks about you often, who considers you one of the most important people in their life, who would show up at 3 in the morning if you called, that friend may never say any of this out loud. Because saying, "You matter to me enormously," is terrifying for most people. It opens them to rejection. It exposes the depth of their attachment. It makes them vulnerable in a way that casual friendships are designed to prevent. So people show love in code. They remember your coffee order. They send you an article that reminded them of you. They mention your name when a friend is struggling with something they know you understand. They defend you in conversations you'll never hear. They choose you first when something good happens and they need someone to share it with. And if you're someone whose love detection system is calibrated to look for grand gestures and explicit declarations, you miss all of it. The evidence streams past you constantly, and you're standing in the middle of it looking around wondering why nobody cares. Jung would have called this a failure of symbolic understanding. You're looking for love in the form your wound taught you to recognize, conditional, dramatic, something that must be extracted through performance. And the quieter, steadier, more genuine form of love that's actually surrounding you doesn't match the template. So you screen it out. Like someone searching for a lost key under a streetlight because that's where the light is, while the key sits in the darkness 3 feet away. There's a particular kind of grief that surfaces when someone finally begins to see this clearly. Jung documented it repeatedly. The patient who realizes they've been loved all along and spent years unable to receive it. That realization brings a specific kind of sorrow that doesn't have a clean name. It's mourning for all the connection you could have had, all the warmth you pushed away, all the reaching out you declined because you were so certain it wasn't real. A woman in her 40s realizes that her college roommate, the one she always assumed merely tolerated her, has been trying to maintain their friendship for 20 years. Every phone call she interpreted as obligation. Every invitation she read as pity. Every "I miss you" she translated as something people just say. And now she's sitting with the possibility that this person genuinely loves her and has been loving her the whole time, across decades, despite receiving almost nothing in return because she kept deflecting every attempt at closeness. That kind of reckoning is devastating in a way that's hard to articulate, But Jung also saw this grief as profoundly productive. Because the moment you begin to recognize the love that's actually present, even if that recognition comes with pain about how long you've missed it, you start dismantling the perceptual filter that kept it invisible. You start catching yourself in the act of dismissing warmth. You start noticing when your inner narrator rewrites someone's genuine care as something else, and slowly, painfully, you begin to let it in. This is the real work. Harder than therapy, harder than shadow integration, harder than any psychological framework. Letting yourself be loved, allowing the evidence to reach you, sitting with the discomfort of mattering to someone without immediately constructing a reason why you don't deserve it or why they must be mistaken. Jung connected this to one of his deepest concepts, the relationship between the ego and the self. The ego, your conscious identity, your story about who you are, has decided you're fundamentally difficult to love. The self, the deeper, larger center of your total psyche, knows otherwise. And the tension between these two creates the exact experience so many people carry, a bone-deep feeling of being unlovable surrounded by objective evidence of being loved. The ego's story and the self's reality are in direct contradiction, and healing happens when the ego finally surrenders its narrative to the self's truth. That surrender is what individuation looks like in this specific context. You stop arguing with reality. You stop explaining away every kind gesture. You stop treating love like a court case where the burden of proof falls on everyone who cares about you. You begin to accept that your lovability isn't something you need to earn or prove or defend. It's something that already exists, that people already respond to, that has been generating genuine affection and loyalty and care around you for years, possibly your entire life, while you've been too busy prosecuting yourself to notice. And when this shift begins, something remarkable happens in your relationships. The people who've loved you quietly, who've held space for you without being asked, who've watched you deflect their care year after year, they notice the change immediately. They feel the door opening. They feel the wall coming down. And what floods through that opening can be overwhelming in the best sense. All the love that was always there but couldn't reach you starts arriving. And you realize the supply was never the problem. The reception was. Jung also observed something that might be difficult to hear, and it's worth sitting with. Your inability to receive love doesn't just hurt you, it hurts the people who love you. When someone cares about you and you consistently communicate, through withdrawal, through deflection, through dismissal of their warmth, that their love doesn't register, it's painful for them too. They start to wonder if they're doing something wrong, if they're not enough, if their love is inadequate somehow. Your wound, left unexamined, creates secondary wounds in the people closest to you. Not because you intend harm, but because the message your behavior sends is, your love for me doesn't count. And that message, repeated over years, erodes people in ways you might never see because they're too loyal to tell you. This is where the work stops being just about you and becomes about everyone in your ecosystem. Healing your capacity to receive love isn't selfish. It's one of the most generous things you can do, because it allows the people who care about you to finally feel that their caring lands somewhere. It closes the loop. It lets love complete its circuit instead of bouncing back to the sender marked, return to sender, recipient not available. There's one more dimension to this that Jung found essential, and it has to do with why you specifically, with all your intensity, your sensitivity, your depth, are the kind of person who generates this hidden love. People are drawn to authenticity in a world saturated with performance. And the irony for someone carrying the wound of unlovability is that their very struggle to be real, their inability to be superficial, their refusal to play the social games that come easily to others, these are the qualities that make them magnetic. You think your inability to make small talk is a flaw. The people who love you experience it as a relief. You think your intensity drives people away. The people who stay experience it as the thing that makes you irreplaceable. Jung saw in the individuation process a paradox that applies directly here. The qualities that isolate you from the many are the same qualities that bond you deeply to the few. And those few, the ones who genuinely love you, who chose you specifically because of who you actually are, rather than who you perform being. Their love is more real and more durable than the broad but shallow acceptance you keep wishing you had. You're looking at the crowded table where you don't have a seat and mourning your exclusion, while behind you sits a smaller table of people who'd take a bullet for you, and you barely glance at them because you're too fixated on the table that rejected you. This reorientation of attention, from obsessing over who doesn't love you to finally seeing who does, is one of the most transformative shifts a person could make. It doesn't require becoming someone different. It requires seeing what's already true. The evidence is there. It's been there. In the friend who always texts back, in the person who lights up when you walk in the way someone quotes something you said months ago, something you'd forgotten, something that clearly stayed with them long after it left your mind. In the colleague who specifically requests to work with you, in the relative who always asks about you by name, in the partner who chose you, keeps choosing you, and whose choice you keep treating as a mystery rather than accepting as evidence. You've been reading the room wrong. You've been reading it through a filter installed by people who either couldn't love you the way you needed or who made you earn something that should have been freely given. And that filter, that ancient, familiar, devastatingly persuasive filter, has been telling you a story about yourself that the people in your life wouldn't recognize. They'd hear your inner narrative about being too much or too difficult or too intense, and they'd look at you with genuine confusion. Because the person you think you are and the person they experience aren't the same person at all. The person they experience is someone they chose, someone they value, someone who makes their life better by being in it. And they've been waiting, some of them for years, for you to believe them when they show you that. This is the quiet truth sitting underneath all the noise. You are loved more than you know, by more people than you've counted, in ways you haven't been letting yourself see. The love is real, and it's been steady, and it's been patient, even when you haven't been able to receive it. And the fact that you can't always feel it doesn't mean it isn't there. It means your receiver needs recalibrating, and that recalibration is some of the most worthwhile work you'll ever do. One of the final stages of individuation was allowing yourself to occupy the space you actually take up in other people's lives, to stop shrinking, to stop apologizing for your existence, to stop performing smallness in the hope that being less visible will protect you from rejection. Because the rejection you keep bracing for, most of the time, it's a ghost. A memory from a time when you were small and dependent, and the people in charge of loving you did a poor job. That was real then, and it shaped everything about how you learned to move through the world. But it's not the whole truth about you now. The whole truth includes the people who stayed, the ones who show up, the ones who think about you more than you'd ever guess, the ones who describe you to others with a warmth that would make you uncomfortable because you wouldn't know what to do with it. The whole truth is bigger and kinder and more populated with love than the story you've been telling yourself. And the gap between that story and reality, that gap is where your healing lives. You don't have to close it all at once. You don't have to suddenly become someone who accepts compliments gracefully and never questions whether people mean it. That's not how this works. It works slowly, in small moments of allowing. A friend says something kind, and instead of deflecting, you say thank you and let it sit for a second. Someone shows up for you, and instead of immediately calculating how to repay the debt, you just let yourself feel held. Someone tells you they love you, and instead of scanning for the ulterior motive, you let the words rest where they land. Each of those moments is a crack in the old filter. Each one lets a little more light through. And over time, enough light gets through that you start to see the room as it actually is, full of people who chose to be there, who want to be there, who are quietly, steadily, without announcement or fanfare, loving you in the only way real love works, consistently, imperfectly, and with a patience that has outlasted every wall you've built to keep it out. That's what Jung would want you to know, that the love is real, that you didn't imagine the warmth, that the people who keep showing up are showing up on purpose, and that the only thing standing between you and the experience of being deeply, genuinely loved isn't some fundamental flaw in who you are. It's an old story, written by wounded hands, that's been due for revision for a very long time. The evidence is all around you. It always has been. And whenever you're ready, even just a little, even just for a moment, it's waiting to be received. If this is resonating in the way I think it might, if something in you is recognizing the pattern even as another part of you is already marshaling reasons to dismiss it, that tension is exactly what the True Self-Discovery Guide was built for. 24 exercises designed to help you see yourself the way the people who love you already see you. Rooted in Jung, rooted in honesty, rooted in the kind of reflection that doesn't let you hide behind your own story. The link is right below.